Ozzy Osbourne, born John Michael Osborne in 1948, came into the world in a modest home on Lodge Road in Aston, Birmingham, England. He grew up in a working-class family where life was tough and every penny counted. At 17, before his legendary music career began, Ozzy found himself on the wrong side of the law. He was arrested for petty burglary after breaking into Sarah Clark's clothes shop just behind his home. The fine was £40, but Ozzy couldn't pay it, so he was sentenced to 3 months in Winson Green Prison. His father refused to cover the fine, believing that some time behind bars might teach Ozzy a valuable lesson, and perhaps it did. After serving just 6 weeks for good behaviour, Ozzy left prison knowing one thing for certain: he never wanted to go back. Ozzy was one of 6 children. The family lived in rough conditions with no indoor plumbing, just a bucket at the end of the bed to use in the night. Despite his larger-than-life persona, Ozzy grew up a nervous and anxious child. He was often scared, overwhelmed by life's challenges, including his struggles in school. At home, though, he found moments of joy when the family would entertain each other with little performances on Saturday nights. It was during one of these skits that a young Ozzy sang Cliff Richard's Living Doll, his first time singing in front of others. Ozzy hated school. His early years were spent at Prince Albert Juniors in Aston, where he struggled academically due to undiagnosed dyslexia and ADHD. Reading was a challenge, and to cope, he would often play the class clown, making others laugh to avoid being ridiculed himself. It was at school that the nickname Ozzy first stuck. He doesn't recall who started calling him that, but it was a natural extension of his last name, Osborne. From then on, he was Ozzy to everyone except his immediate family. After moving to Birchfield Road Secondary Modern in Perry Barr, Ozzy continued to rebel. The school had a strict uniform policy, but he would show up in worn jeans, smelly old sweatshirts and boots. Fighting wasn't his strong suit, so when bullies came around, Ozzy resorted to humour and strange antics to win them over. It was during his time at this second school that Ozzy crossed paths with Tony Iommi, a student 1 year ahead of him. Tony's guitar skills left Ozzy awestruck, though neither of them could have predicted the rock legacy they would go on to create together. Ozzy left school at 15 without a single qualification to his name. With no real options ahead, he turned to manual labour, a path he quickly realised wasn't for him. He first tried his hand as a plumber, but was fired for stealing apples on his lunch break. Next, he worked at an industrial plant tasked with operating a degreasing machine filled with toxic chemicals. Despite warnings not to inhale the fumes, Ozzy couldn't resist and ended up getting high from the chemicals. His reckless behaviour eventually led to his dismissal after he had to be rushed to the hospital. He later found work at the Lucas factory, where his mother also worked, tuning car horns. But the monotony of factory life wore him down. The thought of spending decades in the same job terrified Ozzy, and he knew deep down that he was meant for something more. In a last-ditch effort to escape factory life, Ozzy tried to join the army, but was rejected. Even before he found his footing in music, Ozzy's imagination was already running wild. He made up a fake band and called it the Black Panthers. He even went as far as painting the name on an empty guitar case, though in reality he didn't have a band at all. But everything changed when he bought the Beatles' second LP with the Beatles. The moment Ozzy took that record home and played it, his world transformed. Suddenly, his life had meaning. He became obsessed with the Beatles, listening to the album on repeat and drifting into what he called Beatle World. If John Lennon and Paul McCartney could make it, Ozzy figured he could too. There was just one problem. He didn't know any musicians, but that didn't stop him. Ozzy decided to start by looking the part. He grew his hair long and even tattooed OZZY across his knuckles one afternoon at Sutton Park, figuring that if he couldn't play like a rock star just yet, at least he could look like one. At 17, Ozzy took a job at a slaughterhouse in Digbeth, and surprisingly, he didn't mind it. In fact, he kind of enjoyed it. He started by cleaning sheep stomachs, but soon moved on to killing cows. Known for his dark sense of humour, he would sneak cow eyeballs out of work using them for pranks, dropping them into people's drinks at the pub to get a reaction. But that sense of mischief didn't always work in his favour. After a fight at the slaughterhouse, where Ozzy bloodied a co-worker, he was fired. His 18-month stint there was over. After his string of failed attempts to find the right band, Ozzy decided to take matters into his own hands. He put up a flyer at a local music store, Ringway Music, that read, "Ozzy Zig needs gig." Without a phone, he listed his home address. Not long after, he got a knock at the door. Standing there was Terry Geezer Butler, who had just lost the singer for his band, Rare Breed. Geezer hired Ozzy on the spot. At the time, Ozzy was fed up with the flower power movement. The hippie music of the late 60s, full of peace, love and psychedelic vibes, just didn't resonate with him. He was looking for something darker, something more real. With his father's support, Ozzy took a big step forward. His dad bought him a PA system from George Clay's music shop, selecting a 50-watt Vox system to help kickstart Ozzy's musical journey. The first band Ozzy was invited to join with his new gear was called Music Machine. But there was one problem. They could barely play. After a few false starts and no gigs, they changed their name to The Approach, but things still didn't take off. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Ozzy went back to basics. He posted the infamous flyer at Ringway Music, the one that caught Geezer's attention. Geezer, a rhythm guitarist for Rare Breed, had a knack for writing lyrics, something Ozzy immediately noticed. They only managed to play one gig together, a Christmas party at the Birmingham Fire Station. It was there that Ozzy experienced stage fright for the first time. Disheartened by the lack of momentum, Ozzy and Geezer decided to part ways. Geezer got offered a promotion at his job, and Ozzy, convinced that his dream of becoming a successful singer was slipping away, was ready to give up. But then, out of the blue, came another knock at the door. This time, it was an old acquaintance, Tony. Ozzy hadn't seen him in 5 years, and they barely recognized each other at first. Tony wasn't alone. He had brought Bill Ward, a drummer, with him. At first, Tony wasn't keen on sticking around. But before he could leave, Ozzy noticed something unusual. Tony's fingers. Tony had lost the tips of 2 of his fingers in a welding accident. To cope, he developed his own unique playing style, using thimbles on the ends of his fingers to keep playing the guitar. Tony and Bill were in a band called Mythology, but their promising future was cut short when they were busted for marijuana possession. Their gigs dried up, and they were forced to return to Aston, which is how they ended up knocking on Ozzy's door, looking for a new singer. Eventually, Tony decided to give Ozzy a shot. They still needed a bass player, though, and Ozzy knew exactly who to call: Geezer Butler. The new lineup held their first rehearsal at a community centre in Aston. It was the beginning of something much bigger than any of them could have imagined. Their first gig as a band came at the County Hall Ballroom in Carlisle, and their name at the time was the Polka Tulk Blues Band. The show went well, but afterward, drummer Bill Ward had an idea for a fresh start. He suggested the band change their name to Earth. For much of 1968, Tony's parents kept the band going. They ran a corner shop in Aston and would often provide food for the hungry musicians. Despite the struggles, they had an important break one night. Jethro Tull couldn't make it to a gig because their van broke down, and Earth, who had been waiting outside just in case, seized the opportunity. They performed in front of a packed crowd, and the show was a success. Over the following weeks, they gained momentum. Gigs started getting bigger, and the band became tighter. As their fortunes were rising, they caught the attention of Jim Simpson, who had opened a club above the Crown Pub on Station Street. Simpson offered to manage them, a big step forward for the band. But just as they were ready to tell Tony the news, Tony had an announcement of his own. He was leaving to join Jethro Tull. It was a bitter irony. Jethro Tull, the band they had once replaced at a gig, was now poaching their guitarist. Tony didn't last long with Jethro Tull, quitting after only 4 days. He realized he didn't want to be just another guitarist in someone else's band. He wanted to be part of something he could call his own. When Tony returned, he shared some valuable lessons about the discipline and hard work he had seen in Jethro Tull. If Earth wanted to make it, they'd need to take their work more seriously. With Tony back in the band, Jim Simpson secured their first European tour. Their debut gig was in Copenhagen, Denmark. and they used Tony's van for the trip. The tour didn't start smoothly. The van broke down twice in the first 2 days, but between gigs the band began jamming out ideas for new songs. It was during one of these jam sessions that Tony suggested they create something darker, something that sounded, in his words, evil. They had noticed how crowds flocked to horror films, lining up outside movie theaters for the chance to be scared. That inspiration led them to write the song Black Sabbath. The main riff of the song was built around the Devil's Interval, also known as the tritone, a sound so unnerving that it was banned by the church centuries earlier. Geezer Butler named the song after the Boris Karloff film Black Sabbath, and many believe that this track marked the birth of heavy metal. While the band's sound was coming together, they hit a snag. At one of their gigs, they found out there was already another band called Earth. It was time to change their name again. This time, they settled on Black Sabbath, a name that fit the darker, heavier direction their music was taking. The band played residency gigs at the Star Club in Hamburg, Germany, the very same place where the Beatles had cut their teeth years earlier. These gigs gave Black Sabbath a chance to sharpen their skills as a live band, and it was here that Ozzy began to shake off his stage fright once and for all. In early 1970, they went to Trident Studios in London to record a cover of Evil Woman by The Crow. It was there that they worked with producer Gus Dudgeon, marking another important step in their musical journey. Their hard work paid off. In January 1970, Black Sabbath signed their first record deal with Vertigo, and the stage was set for them to make music history. In 1970, things started to move quickly for Black Sabbath. Their single Evil Woman was played on BBC Radio 1 at 6 in the morning, just once, but that was enough. Ozzy heard it and flipped out with excitement. This was the first time his music had hit the airwaves, and it was a moment he would never forget. His first advance from the record deal was a modest 105 quid. Ozzy used it to buy some new clothes, but more importantly, he gave the rest to his mother to help pay the bills. Despite his growing fame, family always came first for him. The band recorded their debut album at Regent Sound Studios in London with producer Roger Bain. The entire recording process took less than 12 hours, quick, raw and powerful. When they returned from some gigs in Switzerland, their manager Jim Simpson presented them with the final version of their first album. The cover featured an eerie image of a 15th century watermill, Maple Durham Watermill in Oxfordshire. It set the tone for the album's dark, brooding sound. Released on Friday, the 13th of February 1970, Black Sabbath went on to reach number 8 in Britain and number 23 in the US, despite negative reviews from the press. Eager to impress his family, Ozzy played the album for his father. But much to his dismay, his father's reaction was less enthusiastic than he had hoped. This stung Ozzy. He had always wanted to make his father proud, and this was no exception. As the band's popularity grew, so did the need for a more experienced manager. They met with Don Arden in London, a larger-than-life figure in the music industry. Initially, they didn't warm to him, but things changed when they met his daughter, Sharon. Though Sharon gave Ozzy a cautious look at first, he cracked a joke that made her smile. That moment left an impression on Ozzy. Eventually, Black Sabbath chose to go with Patrick Meehan as their manager, who had previously worked for Don Arden. Their decision wasn't without consequences. Jim Simpson, their former manager, immediately sued them. Despite the chaos of the music business, the band had a principle they stuck to. They always split the money evenly, 4 ways. Ozzy believes this fairness is one of the reasons the band lasted as long as it did. During this period, Ozzy's personal life was evolving too. He met Thelma Riley at the Rum Runner Club on Broad Street. The two quickly got involved, moved in together, and were soon married, a decision Ozzy later regretted. As the band prepared for their next step, they had another album in the works, War Pigs. Once again, they returned to Regent Sound Studios in Soho, with rehearsals taking place at Rockfield Studios in South Wales. The album was mixed at Island Studios in Notting Hill. While mixing, they realized they needed one more track to round out the album. Almost on a whim, they wrote and recorded Paranoid. The song, born out of necessity, quickly became one of their biggest hits. In fact, it was so successful that they changed the entire album's name to Paranoid. When Paranoid was released, it went straight to number 4 on the British charts. It even earned the band a spot on Top of the Pops, a major milestone for any band at the time. Their first gig in America was at Ungano's in New York, followed by a show at the legendary Fillmore East, where they shared the stage with Rod Stewart and the Faces. It marked the beginning of their long, intense journey across the US. Between 1970 and 1972, Black Sabbath were on the road constantly, playing gigs and building their legacy one performance at a time. In 1971, during a gig in Denver with the band Mountain, Ozzy was introduced to a new vice, cocaine. It was Leslie West, Mountain's lead singer, who handed Ozzy his first line, a moment that would mark the beginning of a complicated relationship with drugs. After their tours, Black Sabbath returned to Island Studios in Notting Hill to record their third album, Master of Reality. The album was a commercial success, reaching number 5 in Britain and number 8 in the US, solidifying the band's place in rock history. On the personal front, Ozzy's life was changing rapidly. 9 months after marrying Thelma Riley, she became pregnant with their first child, a daughter named Jessica. By the summer of 1972, the band was in Los Angeles at the famed record plant, recording their 4th album. Initially titled Snowblind, a tribute to their love affair with cocaine, the record label stepped in and forced them to change the name. The album became Black Sabbath Vol. 4 instead. But the drug use in the band was becoming a serious issue. Ozzy in particular was consuming cocaine in massive quantities every day, alongside marijuana and Valium. Though he tried heroin, he didn't enjoy it. At one gig at the Hollywood Bowl, Tony collapsed after the show, a sign that their lifestyle was catching up with them. Despite their growing excess, the band members were living large. Ozzy purchased a house in Staffordshire called Bulrush Cottage, where he moved with his wife and daughter. He also bought his parents a bigger home. In less than 3 years, the band had gone from poor kids scraping by to millionaire rock stars. They began mingling with other rock royalty, including Led Zeppelin. The members of Zeppelin would often visit Ozzy at Bulrush Cottage, and Ozzy discovered that Zeppelin's drummer, John Bonham, was just as wild as he was. They would regularly try to outdo each other with outrageous antics. Ozzy's personal ambitions were also growing. He wanted to get his driver's license, but despite several attempts, he failed the test every time. In 1973, Black Sabbath began working on their next album, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, at Clearwell Castle in the Forest of Dean, a reportedly haunted location. The band hit a creative wall while there, struggling with writer's block. Tony found himself stuck, unable to come up with the heavy riffs that had defined the band's sound. Inspiration finally struck when he listened to the album Moontan by Golden Earring. Soon after, Tony wrote the iconic riff for the title track, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. They finished the album at Morgan Studios in London, but tensions were rising. During the tour for Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the band members started becoming irritable and distant, driven by inflated egos and constant cocaine use. By the mid-1970s, the camaraderie that once defined Black Sabbath began to fade. The band members grew more distant from one another, both on the road and in their personal lives. To make matters worse, their early publishing rights had been sold to a company called Essex Music, adding financial strain to their growing internal conflict. Their relationship with management also deteriorated. The checks they were receiving from their manager started bouncing, leading them to fire him. Despite the chaos, the band continued making music. They began recording their 6th album, Sabotage, at Morgan Studios. Ozzy felt you could hear the frustration and tension within the band on that record. It was a reflection of the growing cracks in the foundation of Black Sabbath. During this period, Ozzy and Thelma welcomed their second child, a son named Louis. But Ozzy's personal life was spiraling out of control. His drug and alcohol abuse led to physical altercations with Thelma, and their relationship was deteriorating. By the time they began recording their 7th album, Technical Ecstasy, in Miami, Florida, the band's once unshakable bond was in serious jeopardy. As the 1970s drew to a close, Black Sabbath found themselves in deep trouble. They received a devastating $1 million tax bill from the IRS in America. Without proper management, they couldn't afford to pay their legal bills, and the financial stress began to weigh heavily on the band. For Ozzy, it was all too much. His drinking had spiraled out of control, and the pressures of fame, touring, and band tensions were taking a serious toll. At this point, Ozzy started to lose interest in Black Sabbath. He began dreaming of going solo, fantasizing about a fresh start. The band wasn't getting along anymore, and rehearsals had become unbearable. One day, during a session at Rockfield Studios, Ozzy reached his breaking point. Frustrated with the band, the endless touring, and the financial chaos, he simply walked out and never came back. In January 1978, Ozzy faced a personal tragedy when his father passed away. Not long after that, he shared the news with his family about leaving Black Sabbath. The band, trying to move forward, hired a new singer, Dave Walker, but that arrangement only lasted a few weeks. Then, in a surprising turn of events, Ozzy rejoined the band to record their next album, Never Say Die. For tax reasons, they ended up recording Never Say Die at Sounds Interchange Studios in Toronto, Canada. But things weren't the same. Ozzy and Tony had stopped speaking to each other, and the chemistry that once fueled the band was gone. Although Never Say Die reached number 12 on the UK charts, it bombed in America. The band was struggling to stay relevant, and tensions within the group continued to grow. They hired Don Arden as their manager, a controversial figure in the music world. But for Ozzy, the highlight of working with Arden was seeing his daughter Sharon, who had begun playing a more active role in the management team. Amid the chaos, Ozzy's behavior continued to be erratic. At a gig in Nashville, Tennessee, he fell asleep in the wrong room at the hotel, missed the show entirely, and caused further friction within the band. Finally, on April 27, 1979, the inevitable happened. After years of substance abuse, missed shows, and internal conflict, the band fired Ozzy. He was replaced by Ronnie James Dio, marking the end of an era for Black Sabbath. Devastated and lost, Ozzy moved into Le Parc Hotel in West Hollywood, where he stayed for months, drowning in his own misery. But there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. One day, Sharon came by to see him, telling him that even though he was no longer with Black Sabbath, they still wanted to manage him. With Sharon's guidance, Ozzy started to pick up the pieces of his life. She began to take control, organizing his career and encouraging him to pursue his long-held dream of a solo project. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and Ozzy, with Sharon by his side, was about to embark on the next phase of his rock and roll journey. After being fired from Black Sabbath, Ozzy found himself adrift. But during auditions for his solo project, a friend named Dana Strum introduced him to a young guitarist named Randy Rhoads, who had been playing with Quiet Riot. The moment Randy started warming up, Ozzy knew he had found something special. He didn't need to hear more. He hired Randy on the spot, nearly brought to tears by his talent. Randy travelled back to England with Ozzy, staying with him at Bulrush Cottage. Their creative chemistry was immediate. The first song they wrote together was Goodbye to Romance, a melancholic yet powerful track that would set the tone for Ozzy's solo career. During a party at John Henry's rehearsal studios in London, Randy was fiddling with his guitar when Ozzy suddenly asked him to repeat a particular riff. That spontaneous moment led to the creation of the song Suicide Solution, a haunting track that would become one of their most iconic. Sharon's brother soon introduced Ozzy to bassist Bob Daisley, completing the core lineup for his new band. As Ozzy prepared to make his first solo album, Blizzard of Ozz, the stakes were high. He felt like he was in direct competition with Black Sabbath, and he was determined to prove himself. The album was recorded at Ridge Farm Studios in Surrey, UK, where the magic of tracks like Crazy Train came to life. Crazy Train exploded onto the scene, propelling the album to number 21 on the US charts. It eventually sold over 4 million copies, marking a massive success for Ozzy's solo career. Just days before the tour for Blizzard of Ozz kicked off, Ozzy's personal life took a turn. At a hotel in Blackpool before a warm-up gig under the fake band name The Law, Ozzy and Sharon finally hooked up. Ozzy was struck by Sharon's meticulous handling of their business, realizing that without her, none of this success would have been possible. She even gave Ozzy a style makeover, bleaching his hair and dressing him in new clothes to suit the flashy 80s aesthetic. Despite still being married to Thelma, Ozzy and Sharon's relationship grew intense. They began sleeping together frequently, and for the first time, Ozzy felt real love. He knew that Sharon was the one. As the Blizzard of Oz tour loomed, they returned to Ridge Farm Studios to record their second album, Diary of a Madman. The entire process took less than 3 weeks, and the album quickly became a heavy metal classic. However, tension began to brew within the band. Bob Daisley and drummer Lee Kerslake started complaining about money and demanding more from Ozzy and Sharon. Fed up, Ozzy fired them both, replacing them with Tommy Aldridge on drums and Rudy Sarzo on bass. Ozzy's reputation as a solo artist was still in its infancy, and he needed to make an impression on CBS Records in America. Sharon came up with a unique idea. During a meeting with CBS, Ozzy was supposed to release white doves into the room to create a memorable moment. But when he saw that the PR staff seemed uninterested, Ozzy took things to the next level. He pulled one of the doves from his pocket, bit its head off, and spat the head into a PR woman's lap. Security quickly escorted him out of the building. Sharon followed him outside, grabbed him by the collar, and kissed him. She knew the press would have a field day with the stunt. The Blizzard of Oz tour was a success, with Motorhead opening for them at some shows. Ozzy struck up a friendship with Lemmy Kilmister, forming a bond with one of rock's most legendary frontmen. But by the end of 1981, Ozzy's personal life hit a breaking point. Thelma, his wife, asked for a divorce. She was granted custody of the children, Jessica and Louis, and took ownership of the cottage in Staffordshire. Ozzy was ordered to stay away from the property under a court order. It was a heartbreaking end to a marriage that had long been strained by his substance abuse and infidelity. In 1982, during a gig at Veterans Memorial Auditorium in Des Moines, Iowa, Ozzy Osbourne became the center of one of rock's most infamous stories. As the show raged on, someone in the crowd threw a live bat onto the stage. Thinking it was a fake rubber toy, Ozzy picked it up and in a moment of spontaneous showmanship bit its head off. But instead of the expected dry rubber, he felt something warm and gloopy filling his mouth. The bat was alive. Realizing the mistake too late, Ozzy was rushed to the emergency room to get treated. For the remainder of the tour, he had to endure nightly rabies shots as a precaution. Meanwhile, Ozzy's drinking was spiraling out of control. Sharon, doing everything she could to keep him in check, would steal his clothes at the hotels to prevent him from leaving and getting into trouble. But Ozzy always found a way. One night in San Antonio, Texas, he managed to escape the hotel wearing only one of Sharon's nightgowns. After heavy drinking, he stumbled to a nearby wall and relieved himself, unaware that the wall belonged to the Alamo, one of the most sacred historical sites in Texas. Ozzy was arrested and banned from San Antonio for life. It wasn't until he made a $10,000 donation to the Daughters of the Republic of Texas that the ban was lifted. As the Blizzard of Oz tour continued, tragedy struck. On a night drive from Tennessee to Florida, Ozzy's guitarist, Randy Rhoads, confided in him that he no longer wanted to be a rock star. Randy wanted to go to university and get a degree. Ozzy brushed it off with a few jokes, telling Randy to sleep it off, before retreating to the back of the bus with Sharon. The next morning, they were jolted awake by the sound of crashing, flames, and shattering glass. Confused and terrified, Ozzy discovered that their bus driver, who had a pilot's license, had taken Randy up in a small private plane without permission. The plane, in a reckless dive bomb stunt, clipped the tour bus before crashing into a nearby garage. Randy Rhoads, along with the bus driver and a makeup artist, were killed instantly. Ozzy was devastated. The loss of Randy, someone he considered a close friend and musical soulmate, almost drove him to quit entirely. But Sharon, his constant support, urged him to keep going. Guitarist Brad Gillis from Night Ranger stepped in to help Ozzy finish the tour, but the tragedy of Randy's death weighed heavily on him. It was a dark time for Ozzy, both personally and professionally. But through sheer determination and Sharon's unwavering encouragement, he pushed forward. Amidst the chaos of Ozzy's career, his personal life took a momentous turn when he asked Sharon to marry him, and she said yes. They tied the knot in a private ceremony in Maui, Hawaii, and began their roller coaster journey together. The couple bought a quaint English home called Outlands Cottage, though their nomadic lifestyle would soon become legendary. In the 27 years of their marriage, they would go on to live in 28 different places. When Sharon found out she was pregnant with their first child, she made a concerted effort to get Ozzy's drinking and drug use under control. She even made him sell his shotguns. In September 1983, their daughter Amy was born, but parenthood didn't slow down the rock and roll lifestyle. The family hit the road as Ozzy embarked on a tour to support his third solo album, Bark at the Moon, featuring new guitarist Jake E. Lee. They brought a cot on the tour bus for baby Amy, an attempt to balance family life with life on the road. Motley Crue opened for Ozzy on that tour, and the level of debauchery reached new heights. Ozzy, feeling like he had to outdo them, pushed the boundaries even further. The stories of excess from that tour are legendary, off the charts in terms of insanity. By the time the tour ended, Ozzy and Sharon's relationship had reached a boiling point. Their fights became more intense, fueled by Ozzy's relentless drinking, which had rendered him barely functional. In one desperate attempt to get out of performing, Ozzy shaved his head. It didn't work. Sharon forced him to wear a wig, which Ozzy mischievously filled with blood capsules to continue his antics. Not long after, Sharon found out she was pregnant again, this time with their second child, Kelly. She took drastic action, checking Ozzy into the Betty Ford Center for rehab. He was tricked into going, thinking he was there to learn how to drink properly, not to quit altogether. But the rehab stint didn't take. On his way to a gig in Rio de Janeiro, Ozzy got drunk before the plane even touched down. In the summer of 1985, Ozzy had a brief reunion with Black Sabbath at Live Aid. Sharon was pregnant again at the time, and the reunion felt awkward, with Ozzy receiving preferential treatment while the rest of Black Sabbath didn't. Still, it was a surreal moment to be back on stage with his former bandmates. That November, Ozzy and Sharon welcomed their third child, Jack. Now, the Prince of Darkness found himself touring the world with 3 small children in tow, something that clashed with his dark image. After Jack's birth, Ozzy decided to get a vasectomy. But Ozzy's personal life was still riddled with dangerous missteps. After cheating on Sharon, he faced an HIV scare. His immune system wasn't functioning properly, and he received a false positive on his first test. When they analysed his blood further, they found it contained nearly lethal amounts of alcohol and cocaine. The scare shook him, and Ozzy vowed never to cheat on Sharon again. In the midst of these personal crises, Ozzy found himself embroiled in a public controversy that threatened his career. A young boy had shot himself while listening to Ozzy's music, and the boy's family blamed Ozzy for their son's death. They claimed the song Suicide Solution contained subliminal messages that encouraged the boy to take his own life. The press had a field day, and Ozzy found himself at the center of a media storm. He became enemy number 1 in America. Things got so bad that Ozzy had to wear a bulletproof vest for in-store signings, fearing for his safety as Christian groups and protesters gathered outside his shows. Some claimed his music was satanic, and every time they attacked him, it only amplified his fame. Despite the backlash, every controversy seemed to sell more records. Every time his face appeared on television, another 100,000 albums flew off the shelves. The irony wasn't lost on Ozzy. What was meant to destroy him only made him more famous. The lawsuit surrounding Suicide Solution was eventually dismissed, with Ozzy protected under the First Amendment. But the turbulence in his life was far from over. Jake E. Lee left the band, and in came a new lead guitarist, Zakk Wylde. Ozzy had always surrounded himself with talented musicians, and Zakk was no exception. But as the band kept evolving, Ozzy began to realize that his heavy drinking and drug use were no longer making him the fun, wild character he thought he was. Instead, it was dragging him down, making him sad and pathetic. Determined to take control of his life, Ozzy checked himself into the Hazelden Clinic in Minnesota for another attempt at rehab. Around this time, he and Sharon bought a house in Buckinghamshire called Beale House, once owned by actor Dirk Bogarde. But the peaceful setting didn't last long. In a harrowing moment, Ozzy's substance abuse reached a breaking point. He suffered an alcoholic seizure, and not long after, things took an even darker turn. On September 3rd, 1989, Ozzy was arrested for the attempted murder of Sharon after trying to strangle her at their home. In court, the judge granted him bail on the condition that he returned to rehab, and Sharon eventually dropped the charges. When Ozzy emerged from rehab, he recorded one of his most successful albums, No More Tears. By 1992, Ozzy decided it was time to retire from the road. He called the farewell tour No More Tours, ending what had been 25 years of near-constant touring. However, retirement didn't suit Ozzy for long. Bored and restless, he asked Sharon to book another tour. Sharon reached out to Lollapalooza, but they turned him down, thinking Ozzy was a dinosaur from a bygone era. So they created their own festival, Ozzfest. Launched in 1996, it was a massive success, introducing a new generation to Ozzy's music and showcasing the best of heavy metal. Sharon also had the idea to reunite the original Black Sabbath lineup and have them play at Ozzfest. They went into the studio to work on new material for the first time in decades, but tragedy struck when drummer Bill Ward had a heart attack. Though the reunion tour continued without him, the new album never materialized, as the material just didn't meet their standards. In 2001, Ozzy suffered another personal blow when his mother passed away, a loss that hit him hard. Around this time, in 1997, Sharon and Ozzy were renting Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith's house in Beverly Hills. It was there that they decided to allow TV cameras into their lives for a documentary called Ozzy Osbourne Uncut. The show was a hit and won awards. This success led to an episode of MTV Cribs, filmed at their new home on Doheny Road. The audience loved it, and MTV saw the potential for something bigger. That's when the Osbournes was born. Ozzy wasn't thrilled about the idea at first, but he went along with it, happy for Sharon and her vision. Their eldest daughter, Amy, opted out, preferring to stay out of the spotlight. If Ozzy had known what he was getting into, he says, he would have never agreed to do the show. The constant intrusion of cameras in their daily lives became overwhelming. But despite the strain, the Osbournes was a massive success, catapulting Ozzy into a level of fame even greater than his music had ever achieved. The new fame led to some surreal moments. Ozzy was invited to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where President George W. Bush famously quipped, "Ozzy, Mum loves your stuff." A month later, Ozzy found himself shaking hands with Queen Elizabeth during her Golden Jubilee weekend. For a boy from Aston, it was an unbelievable moment. Ozzy even became friends with his childhood idol, Paul McCartney. But not all the feedback from his newfound fame was positive. He received a letter from Bill Cosby, criticizing the foul language on the Osbournes. Sharon, never one to back down, fired back with, "People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, and we all know about your little affair. So how about you put your own house in order before having a go at ours?" At one point, Ozzy's battle with addiction had him taking up to 42 different pills a day. One was meant to balance the effects of the other, but it left him in a constant state of disarray. His tremors were so severe that he shook like an epileptic, a grim reminder of how far things had gone. During this difficult period, Ozzy's world was turned upside down once again when Sharon was diagnosed with cancer of the lymph nodes. Her chemotherapy treatments were brutal, causing her to suffer from seizures. Ozzy, watching the woman he loved battle for her life, called it the worst time of his life. Around this time, Ozzy recorded a duet with his daughter Kelly, an emotional rendition of Changes. The father-daughter pair performed the song on top of the Pops, creating a touching moment that resonated with fans. But tragedy struck again when Ozzy had a horrific accident on a quad bike. The vehicle flipped, breaking his neck, fracturing 8 ribs and puncturing his lung. Doctors placed him in a chemical coma for 8 days to stabilize him. When Ozzy awoke, he learned that his duet with Kelly had reached #1. It was a bittersweet moment as he struggled through recovery but found solace in the success they shared. By 2005, the Osbournes TV show came to an end. The show had been a cultural phenomenon, but it was time for the cameras to stop rolling. For Sharon, however, it opened the door to a successful television career, allowing her to carve out a new path in the spotlight. Despite the ups and downs, life remained unpredictable for Ozzy. One night, he stumbled upon a burglar in his bathroom, a man in a ski mask trying to make off with the family's valuables. After a brief scuffle, Ozzy threw the intruder out of the window. The man escaped with nearly $2 million worth of jewelry, but amidst all the chaos, there was hope. After decades of addiction, Ozzy finally managed to get sober. The Prince of Darkness, who had spent so many years battling demons, both internal and external, was able to put his drinking and drug use behind him. Ozzy Osbourne's journey has been anything but ordinary. From his humble beginnings in Birmingham to becoming the godfather of heavy metal, Ozzy's life has been a whirlwind of triumphs and tragedies. With Black Sabbath, he helped create a new sound that would forever change rock music. As a solo artist, he redefined what it meant to be a rock star, pushing boundaries and leaving a lasting impact on fans worldwide. But it wasn't just the music that defined Ozzy. It was the chaos, the controversies, and the relentless spirit that kept him going through it all. He battled addiction, survived personal tragedy, and even fought his own demons in a very public way. Through it all, one thing remained constant: his love for music and his family, and his unique ability to reinvent himself time and time again. Even now, at 75 years old, Ozzy continues to perform, proving that he is far from finished. Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, with millions of albums sold and an undeniable legacy in the annals of music history, Ozzy Osbourne remains an icon. His life has been a testament to survival, of outlasting the odds, of rising from the depths, and of continuing to push forward no matter the obstacles. Ozzy Osbourne is more than just a rock star. He's a legend, a survivor, and the enduring Prince of Darkness.